Today I'm here to talk about all mode operation on VHF, UHF, and microwave. Anybody know what I mean by all mode? What is all mode? Something other than FM. FM is a mode, though. We'll talk about that. Anybody know that you can talk on sideband on 2 meters? Yeah. Who's done it? Show of hands. Who's talked on sideband 2 meters? All right, just a couple. You can do it. You can have CW on 2 meters. You can do whatever you want on 10 gigahertz. I've done all of those bands. So I'm going to talk about those today and kind of give you a little bit of introduction to how to do it, why to do it, and the fun that you can achieve when you do it. A little more about me. I was first licensed as a novice in the early 90s while in high school. Not the oldest nor the youngest person in the room, I hope, but nonetheless part of the younger generation, if you will, in our hobby. Attended RIT. RIT allowed me to develop some other interests in people and things, and decided to get away from the hobby for a few years. Got married, had some kids, and decided to get back into it. I am currently the chairman of the Rochester VHF group. That is a group that is very much focused on all mode operation in VHF, UHF, and microwave bands. We kind of enjoy pushing the art and science of radio to its limits. Nothing we do is easy, but the harder it is, the more fun we have doing it. And hopefully I'll convince some of you tonight to give that a try. Speaking of that, on behalf of the Rochester VHF group, I would like to thank all of you who participated in the January VHF contest. We had quite a turnout despite an awful storm, and you're going to see a picture of my vehicle in that storm. But many people got on the air, even if it was just on 2 meter FM simplex, to hand out points, and it made a huge, huge difference, and it is very likely that Rochester is going to win the gavel this year. And that is not just the effort of the Rochester VHF group, but all of you who get on the air to help out and, as I said, either hand out points or be competitive. My interests are contesting, building, experimenting. You probably won't find me rag chewing on the repeater. I'm just not that kind of a guy. I like to tinker and experiment, and if you're one of those kind of people as well, getting into all mode operation and building is something I'm sure that would interest you. My entire professional career has been at the Gannett Nuclear Power Plant out in Ontario. I started there as an electrical engineering co-op and worked through various positions and just never left. I'm still getting paid, so I guess I'm still an employee there, but been there 21 years. Married with 3 elementary school kids. This room is very familiar to me as a father. I sit in here as my kids are doing their Cub Scout courses and such. Spent about 6 hours in this room last weekend with my Bear Scout. So just a little bit before I get started, anybody here ever work towards the XCC or anything along those lines? You ever go out and get one of those awards? Once you get the award, is that it? You hung up the mic and you're done? No, what did you do after you got the XCC?
Same thing going.
Keep going, right? Oh, I got 1 band, I'm going to go for 5 now, or I'm going to go get something else, right? It's the journey to get to that end result that is the most fun. Once you get there, you relish in it for a little while. Yeah, I got it. And then you move on to the next thing. So it's really the journey to get there. Once you're there, you're going to want to go somewhere else. And so for those of you who you enter the journey usually in FM operations and on the repeater, maybe you move to simplex, maybe you get bored with that, maybe you want to go on to do some new things. Give you some ideas of the things I do, and then talk about more of the technical aspects of that. So the joy of building. I love to build things. I build things I don't even use, just because I like to build things. So this particular contraption here is a rack for the top of my vehicle. So I want to go out and put VHF and UHF antennas on my car. You would not believe this contraption when you're going down 490. I'm going to show you this in a minute. I don't want the thing to fly off and kill somebody behind me, so I wanted a nice robust rack for the top of my car. So this is what I built. You can kind of see the beginning stages on the left, and then what it looks like almost done on the right-hand side. I'm an electrical engineer, I'm not a mechanic. So cutting aluminum and things like this was something I had to learn. I learned that you can buy an aluminum blade for your chop saw. Your wood chop saw you have, you buy an aluminum titanium carbide blade and it cuts through this stuff like butter. And so I learned that, and I was thrilled to learn that. So it really is a joy, even if I don't use this stuff a whole lot. This I happen to use quite a bit. Okay, what's the inside of my car look like? On the left-hand side is the kind of the interim look. On the right-hand side is kind of what it looks like in progress. For contests and experiments, this is what I drive around with. I've got, in my vehicle, I can operate 10 bands from 6 meters all the way up to 10 gigahertz. If I really wanted to, I could throw up a wire and operate all the UHF bands as well. A little bigger view of that. Of course, you saw the rotor, so I have to have a controller, right? So there's my controller there. Got my paddles there. The head unit for my IC7000. I've got a little FT817 there that drives all my transverters.
Have you ever been stopped by the police?
I've had the police come to talk to me, yes. They're very interested in what I do. I now have, because of the friendly officers, I now have magnets I put on the side of my car that says Amateur Radio Communications with the Rochester VHF Club logo, and they just wave now. So,
Is that a localizer glide slope down on the lower left?
is it a what?
What is that in the lower left there? Is that a clock?
This here?
No.
Rotor.
This is
Oh, it's
my
a,
rotor.
oh, it's a rotor. It's weird from this angle. It almost looks like a localizer glide slope.
I have no idea what the localizer glide slope is.
Aviation.
It's definitely not on there.
You need one in your car, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
All right, what else do I have in here?
Flying cars by now.
I have all my FM radios. So I have my normal rig here is my 4-band FM, 10 meters, 6 meters, 2 meters, 70 centimeters. So that's normally not in my car, and then I add 1.2 gigahertz, 222, and 927 megahertz. So quite a bit of options available in my vehicle. No, I don't drive around like this every day. I do put it in there for weekends and having fun though. All right, so that's the front of the vehicle. In the back of the vehicle, I had to put all the amplifiers, right? That's, you gotta build stuff, more power, right? So I put all the amplifiers in. I built it into one of these racks, so I had some chance to get it in and out within a couple hours of wanting to go out. And so transverters are inside of here. This is 222. I've got amplifiers for 2 meters, 222 and 432 megahertz. I built microwave racks here, so behind here, and I'll show you in a minute, 900 megahertz, 1.2 gigahertz, 2.3 gigahertz, 3.4 gigahertz are all on board here, and 5 and 10 gigahertz are outboard with a dish.
How do you power all this stuff?
I'm going to show you in a moment, I think, if I put that picture in here. Let me keep going, and I'll explain it to you. There's no nuclear components in here, nothing taken from work. So what one of those racks looks like here, and this is the part I really enjoy, spending hours and hours in the garage building. So all of these parts you buy. So I've got transverters here, these little silver boxes. And a transverter basically takes one frequency, for example, 144 megahertz, and mixes it with a local oscillator to produce an output of, say, 902 megahertz. That happens to be that transverter there. And so I can feed it with a 2-meter all-mode radio, and I'll get whatever frequency the transverter produces. So in this particular rack, I have 902 megahertz and 1.2 gigahertz. I have the amplifiers for those, a filter, and some what we call sequencer boards to make sure everything operates in the correct order. You don't want a hot switch, 100 watts of power through a small little relay, so you want to make sure the relay switches before the...
I get noisy with those fans.
It does. I can use headsets and what have you, so it's in the back of the vehicle, so it doesn't bother me too much. So this is the fun part. Buying some surplus heat sinks online and buying surplus commercial amplifiers and trying to figure out how to put them together and having them blow up and let the smoke out and having to go back to eBay and buy another one to figure out what I did wrong. I have a lot of fun with that. This was a couple weekends ago. So this is what it looks like. You will not miss me if you see me driving down the highway. You can't miss me. I have people pull up doing 55 miles an hour on the highway, and they pull up right beside me, and they're looking in my car, and I'm a little worried about them because they're not watching where they're going, and they get all excited about that. I've had all kinds of questions. I've had folks ask me if I'm tracking bears or wildlife, or, one time we had a couple prisoners escape. It was just maybe a year or two ago, and they're trying to find them. They wondered if they had embedded tracking devices, and I was out there with the Department of Homeland Security.
Sounds like a good idea.
So right there, what you're looking at, I am set up on 10 bands with all those frequencies on the right listed. And so 50 megahertz, 60 megahertz, 144, all the way up to 10 gigahertz. And the outboard station here, you'll see the 5 gigahertz antenna, which is just a little Wi-Fi dish, and then a dedicated 10 gigahertz system. And I bet you, I can talk farther on 10 gigahertz than most of you can on 2 meters. I bet you. I'll open it up for a test and see. But I can talk from, we're over in Pavilion, which is a little east of Attica. And I can talk to Massachusetts on 10 gigahertz. Simplex, no repeaters, no internet, no nothing.
Wow.
Bouncing off of what?
The troposphere.
Troposcatter.
Yes, sir.
How many people are on these different frequencies that you're on here?
Let's see, on 10 gigahertz, I made contacts with maybe 8 unique individuals. And then I ride around the different grid squares and I try to contact those people as many times as I possibly can. So in that case, this was a relatively short distance contact of maybe 40, 45 miles.
What's the maximum height? What's of that?
The rear mast,
Well, you're driving around with this thing up in the air.
let's see, it's about 12 feet.
How many?
About 12 feet.
Okay.
It's actually 2 inches below 12 feet because one of the bridges I go under is 12 feet. And the first time I had to go under it, I just didn't trust my measurements, so I got out, leaned, and just hit the gas very slowly as I looked up to make sure I was going to clear it. I did. I cleared it with 2 inches. I've learned that the rating on the bridges is for the worst case part of the curve on the bridge, not the entire thing. That's something you want to figure out, though.
Until you get clotheslined by a low-hanging wire.
I have the 222 antenna has gotten clotheslined a few times by some branches, but no wires. The rear antenna, which comes off the trailer hitch, has 6 meters and 2 meters, and it's telescoping. 6 meters really doesn't work very well on the ground, so you have to get that up in the air, and that goes up to 18 to 20 feet. And so it's telescoping, and it nests down when I'm driving. Can't put that up in the air. That would I did all kinds of things. Okay, so you can kind of see there. This is a side effect of operating all mode on VHF and UHF. I actually forgot my microphone for my FT817. And it didn't really matter. I don't know what I did with it, but I forgot it. So there I am on my straight key and operating 10 gigahertz on a straight key with a WB2 BYP over in Macedon. So again, the thrill of all mode, microphone or not, doesn't matter. Ready to go.
Yeah, we'll get it done one way or the other.
We'll get it done.
Well, you had a bug in there. I saw the side panels.
Yeah, so on 5 gigahertz and 10 gigahertz, you have to slow down really slow sometimes.
What is that?
And I'm going to explain that to you in a little while, but based on the noise theory, when you slow way down to say 5 words per minute, people can really copy you. So if I'm flying along at 18 words per minute, somebody can tell I'm there, but they can't copy my call sign at all. I slow way down to 5 words per minute, and they copy perfect. If I want a long dash at the end of a transmission to let them know I'm done, da-da-da, can't do that with a paddle, so I use a straight key for that. So, making the impossible possible is what drives us in VHF, UHF, and microwave. It is a disease. I'm telling you right now it's a disease. I warn you right up front. If you get into this just a little bit, you're going to get into it a little bit more, and a little bit more, and a little bit more. Next thing you know, $5,000 is gone, and you have no idea what happened to it. Not everyone is at an advanced stage. Some people have self-control. They can limit themselves. I'm clearly not one of those people. You might not notice, but the people around you will. Your spouse will. when, you're asking for transverters for Christmas and she has no idea what that is. And I can't be held liable if you go down this path and you decide you have a lot of fun with it. So a little bit of technical parts in this. Who's heard that VHF, UHF, and microwave is line of sight? That is a myth. That is a myth from people who haven't done what I do. Line of sight is no fun, right? Really, if you're line of sight from me, I might as well put the radio down, walk down the road a mile and talk to you. I'm looking for things that are hard. I'm looking for things that are fun to do. So here's an example of that 10 gigahertz setup I was on, just to give you an idea of what I was doing. Here I am in pavilion with a relatively good height, and John is in his backyard, and we have Baker Hill between us. Anybody who knows Baker Hill knows you're not getting through Baker Hill. It is not line of sight. It is quite an obstacle. So this software shows the first Fresnel zone at 10 gigahertz, which you notice is pretty narrow. Now, we can go to the second or third Fresnel zone and make that ellipse wider, but I'm not getting over Baker Hill. So there is no way to operate 10 gigahertz line of sight with the curvature of the Earth and Baker Hill. Yeah, I can do it every single time. So what's going on there? We have a little bit of troposcatter, but we also have some knife edge diffraction over Baker Hill. So really what's happening is we're getting a little bit of energy that's just skimming off the top of Baker Hill, and you can kind of see, in a graphical representation what's going on there, and we can communicate over this path every single time. It doesn't require some special atmospheric conditions. It happens every single time. Now there's probably some scatter from some water towers or some other buildings, but the primary effect here is knife edge diffraction over Baker Hill. This is normally an impossible contact. Most people would think it was impossible. How the heck are you going to get 10 gigahertz over this hill without physically bending the radio waves? So we make impossible contacts over impossible paths with equipment that's impossible to find at HRO, or impossible to find at DX Engineering. And that's what makes this fun. So more about line of sight as a myth. If the curvature of the Earth prevents you from seeing the other side of the contact, and this happens all the time, this is exaggerated here, but there's the curvature of the Earth, and I can talk from here to Maryland any single day on 144 megahertz sideband. How is it that that's happening? It's not line of sight. We know that. Curvature of the Earth is going to stop that. And so what's happening here is we're actually sending the signal up into space, and we have a change in the dielectric due to moisture, and we have dust and particles and other things up in the atmosphere, and we reflect off of it, and in some cases refract off of it. And that's it. It's that simple. It happens every single day. I don't need anything special to do it. Matter of fact, the military communicated this way for decades. Before satellites were secure, they operated troposcatter systems. They had these big dishes, and that's how they would send data from one side of the country to the other. It was very secure because the amount of energy that goes up and gets reflected back is very small. So you might be talking about 1/1,000,000th of the energy being transmitted actually scatters back to the receiving station. Most people aren't going to be able to receive that or do anything with it, so the military was very effective in using this for probably 40 or 50 years. Any questions so far? All right, this is the primary mechanism by which all we call weak signal operators operate. Now you've got some crazy things like EME out there, but if you hear somebody say, hey, I was on FT8 on 2 meters, I didn't know you had FT8 on 2 meters, but they're essentially just operating troposcatter. And that's how we do it. So from 2 meters up to 10 gigahertz, this is a great mode, a great propagation method for the signals. Now, above 10 gigahertz, you start to get into absorption. So say 24 gigahertz, the moisture actually starts to absorb the radiation too much, and you get attenuation. You can still do it, and people do it, but it starts to get absorbed there. And below 144 megahertz, the beam width of your signal is just way too wide. So say on 6 meters, you're just way too wide, which means that common scattering area is going to be very large. You're going to get even less energy get reflected back. it works on 6 meters, just not great. Okay, another example, here is K1RZ. He operates an awesome station in Maryland. And there's me, again, up in Pavilion. Kind of see a map here. I can talk to Dave every single day if I wanted to. 2 meters, 222 megahertz, 70 centimeters. And we can sit there and have a conversation with travel scatter. Yes, sir.
So how much power are you using?
100 watts. Dave uses a lot more at his station, but as you know, kind of limited by the lowest power station, and I'm it. So 100 watts in my mobile throws just enough current. I don't need to go much beyond that. I have to get a generator out and run it off a generator. So you can kind of see here the exaggerated nature, but this is a real path versus the illustration that we had before of what the curvature of the Earth would do. And again, line of sight is impossible here. Yes, sir?
Is it time of day dependent? Or, I mean, are there other factors that you have to, or is it just up all the time?
There's a certain element of it that's up all the time. Now, in the summertime, you get some ionization, you get some additional charged particles that help during storms. For example, if there was a huge rainstorm right about here, I would be able to scatter particles off the rain, and that would make it much easier. So I could be in the middle of a Q cell, you know, not easy to hear him, and all of a sudden he goes from, you know, not even moving the meter to an S9, and then back again. And if an airplane flies through that path, it comes way up, and then the airplane goes away and it comes way back down. So there's a lot of things in the atmosphere that could improve it, and summertime tends to have a lot more of that activity.
Is it hard to make initial contacts with the directivity and
It
elevation? Because I assume you're adjusting the elevation actually changes the landing angle on the other side?
On 10 gigahertz, I have to look at elevation. On all the other bands, I just point at the horizon.
Okay.
So it's not that hard because I know where he is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, these are not the bands where you just kind of randomly get on and CQ, and see what you can find. You know, this is kind of something where you say, hey Dave, let's go try 10 gig today. Let's see if it works. Or let's go try 24 gig and see if the atmospheric absorption kills us. And he says, all right, let's give it a try, you know, or during a contest or something like that. Or say you built a new system and you want to see how that works. So you get on the air with somebody you know's got the system and try it out. Now, something that many of you may be familiar with is sporadic E. This is responsible for most of the 10-meter skip that you'll hear in the summer. So many people have gotten on sideband on 10-meter skip, and you know, you'll hear it open to Texas or Florida or sometimes even California. So this is a little different phenomenon where in the atmosphere in the E region, you'll get some ionized particles that form clouds. And essentially what happens normally in the VHF range, your signal will go straight out in space, and it wouldn't be reflected or refracted, or if it was, it wouldn't be refracted enough to end up back on Earth. And so in the summertime especially, but any time of the year, you get sporadic E clouds. And this is when 10 meters and 6 meters really shine. And people like me get really excited and start calling friends and go, 6 meters is open, get on the air. Something that would be normally dead, and then you've got every frequency from 50.125 up to 50.200 just filled with people making contacts. They call that the magic band. When it's dead, it's dead. There's nothing you can do about it. But when 6 meters is open, it's open to just about everywhere. Okay, so everybody's seen a chart like this before? Who's seen a chart like this? All right, most people. Have you ever noticed this text all the way in the bottom right-hand side? Yeah, there's all these other frequencies out there. This one only goes up to, it says 1240 megahertz. So on this side of the chart, which is open to all amateur radio operators, technicians included, provides you full rights on how many bands. Now it's kind of hard to see there. Does anybody want to take a guess at how many bands are represented between the nice colorful chart and all the little text?
20?
Very close. 18 bands. Now I admit I do not operate at 134 gigahertz. I think that's plumbing at that point. I don't even think it's electronics. You tap the side of a copper pipe and maybe it resonates there. I'm not sure. But essentially, technicians have access to all possible modes on all bands with one minor exception. What is that minor exception shown on the chart? It's up here on 10 meters. So you only have access to sideband and CW there, right? But I don't think that's a real big restriction, because sideband is where most of the activity is. You'll get some people that want to operate FM repeaters on 10 meters. But other than that, you have access to every single band, every single mode, everything I'm going to talk about today. Experiment to your heart's delight. You have access and you have the rights and privileges on all those frequencies. So on 17 out of 18 of these bands, you have full access. Now, all of those 18 bands, most people aren't insane, and they just operate on a few. 6 meters, 2 meters, and 70 centimeters. Take a radio like this as an example. This is a Yaesu FT857. Might look familiar to some of you. This operates all the VHF bands from 160 meters up to 10 meters, and has 6 meters, and has 2 meters, and has 70 centimeters. So the three most common VHF, UHF bands, 6 meters, 2 meters, and 70 centimeters, are embedded in here, and it has all modes. So if you happen to have a radio like this, and we'll go through some of the other ones, you already have the capability to operate all mode. You may not have done it, but it's built into these radios. How about a TS2000? Who's Kenwood? Oh, Kenwood's okay. ICOMs, IC991 is one of the more popular radios these days from ICOM. A lot of the radios now are coming with VHF, UHF, all mode. Almost all of the HF rigs these days are coming with 6 meters. And so you get access to all mode operation on 6 meters. I'm going to cover this briefly, but the different types of modes you may operate. FM, most people are very familiar with FM. Why do we use it? The audio is great. Not hard to tune, right? It's channel-based most of the time. Tolerance minor frequency drift. You could be off by a couple hundred hertz on FM and you wouldn't even know it, the way that the modulation works. If you're off by a couple hundred hertz on sideband, you kind of sound like Mickey Mouse, right? And you probably heard it on the HF band. So now the disadvantages, you require a relatively high signal-to-noise ratio to demodulate FM properly. And so it's not the best DX mode you have out there, but it works great for local contacts. Sideband, good spectral efficiency. You're not losing power to the carrier. The carrier is actually regenerated on the receiver side, so you're not generating that power to do that. And so all of your power is concentrated into the voice distinguishable parts of that signal. So more power directed to the parts of what you want to transmit means more power gets sent farther away. The receiver is also more sensitive, so you hear noise, right? You hear, just like on HF, you'll hear the noise mixed in with some static bursts. There's a lightning storm nearby, again, things you don't hear on FM. CW operates the same way in VHF, UHF as it does HF. One difference though, for those of you who've listened to say an HF contest, HF contesters on CW operate almost full signals. You'll hear an S9 type signal on HF when they're doing CW. You will not hear that on VHF, UHF.
Signals are weak.
If you got an S9 signal, you're on sideband. You're not using a CW. VHF and UHF operators will tend to use the mode that's most efficient for making a contact. So if you got S9 signals, you're on FM or sideband. If you're not even moving the meter, you're on CW. That's a weak signal. Now, the downside to CW, of course, is that I don't like to have whole QSOs on CW. I'm just not one of those kind of operators. I can operate maybe 13 words per minute comfortably, 18 words per minute, 20 words per minute if I really have to, but I'm not comfortable to sit there and have a whole conversation. But I will exchange grid squares, and I can generally understand the call signs of the person I'm operating with, but if you start telling me what you had for lunch that day, I'm probably not going to happen. Digital, this is, what's that?
Been there, done that.
Yeah. So digital, that's really the new big thing, and it's kind of reviving weak signal operation through mostly the work of K1JT out of Princeton with the WSJTX software suite. it works on any bands, but he originally designed it for troposcatter, EME, and a lot of the things we do on VHF and UHF bands. But you'll hear it on HF any day. It's really become a pretty popular software suite. Now, it's not conversational. So let me take an example of PSK31. That's a digital mode. It's a weak signal digital mode. You find it on 20 meters, 40 meters all the time. But it's conversational. I can type to you, and it can keep up with the rate at which I'm typing. And then you can type back, and we can tell each other what we had for lunch, and I took the dog out today, and all of that, and it's pretty easy to do. When I'm on some of these weak signal modes, like FT8, I'm not exchanging a whole lot of information. I'm exchanging my call sign, my grid square, maybe a signal report, the minimum amount of information I need to have a legitimate exchange. So that's kind of the downside. Very low data rate and requires a lot of synchronization. Great for contesting, great for looking for remote grid squares, not very good for day-to-day rag chewing. Any questions on modes?
Are there published band plans for all those modes?
There are, and because FT8 is, and some of those weak signal digital modes are fairly new, you'll find on this side of the country, some people will use one set of frequencies, and on another side of the country, say the Pacific Northwest, they might use another. But the most common you hear on 50.313 for 6 meters, and if you tune in there, you'll hear the warbling of all the digital noise. And if you have WSJTX and the sound card, you can decode that and or just see it on the waterfall. Okay, so FM. FM is the workhorse of VHF and UHF. Excellent for repeater use, excellent to get on for local simplex, have a conversation. Great mode for our local work. Almost all the antennas are vertically polarized for FM. And really, if you think about it, most of our mobile antennas are vertical as well. So the polarization is very important. If you're going to be operating vertically polarized, you want the other person you're talking to be vertically polarized. Maybe you remember when you're studying for your technician or one of the other classes, your electromagnetic fields, the electrical and the magnetic fields have to be going in the right direction or you get significant losses. So you can see here, you've got a vertically polarized omnidirectional antenna, and this has a 4.5 dBi of gain at 2 meters. Pretty big, tall antenna. And then I've got a 4-element Yagi, vertically polarized, and I get 10.2 dBi of gain. That's quite a bit of difference in the power. So you think, oh, it's just a few dB, but what do we got? Almost 6 dB there, and so 2 power doublings worth of gain. So the difference would be if I'm running 100 watts effective over here, perhaps it's 400 watts effective with an antenna like that. And so you can kind of see how you can use that directionality and really improve your operation of FM. By the way, the national, for contesting, most of the years that's been won in FM only contesting has been one right here in Rochester. So I think we had K2SI win one year, we had W2EV win one year, and 2HJD win another year. So Rochester seems to be where it's at for FM contesting, and we have a lot of activity on the bands. Okay, so if FM is your thing, and your challenge, if you choose to accept it, is to build an FM station that can really communicate. Baofangs are great, but the antennas on there, you actually lose energy. If you don't have any gain in those antennas, you actually lose energy. So what can you do on FM to improve your range? Well, how can you experiment with a friend to see how far you can make it and have a real conversation on 2-meter simplex? I suggest that you should be able to communicate within a 25-mile radius on simplex. If you can't do that, then what have you really got? What kind of a station do you really have? So if you've got 50 watts minimum, you got 6 dBi gain of an antenna, you can do this. Now, I'll tell you what's kind of thrilling as you start to expand that distance. Okay, I'm out to 25 miles. Okay, did a few upgrades, I'm out to 50 miles. Okay, I did a few upgrades, I can communicate up to 60 miles on FM. FM simplex, no repeaters, no internet, and perhaps with even a home-built antenna. So if that's what you've got, you don't have an all-mode radio, do what you can. Maximize your benefit there with FM. And find a friend who is interested in doing the same, you have a great time. Okay, single sideband. This is where it's at. Like, again, the power efficiency of single sideband is going to outperform FM almost every day when it comes to DX. It's good for local communications. The Rochester VHF group has a net on Mondays. We meet on 2-meter sideband, 144.260, and Thursdays, 6-meter sideband, 50.200. And we have a good group of a dozen guys who get on the air and chat it up and test out their gear and make sure everything's working. So it works great, good for DX. Not normally capable of repeater use. Power levels on sideband come and go based upon your audio output. And so most of our commercial type repeaters won't operate very well with sideband. It takes quite a complicated system to be able to do that. Nearly all the antennas are horizontally polarized. So as I said before, if you've got one station with vertical, another station with horizontal, it'll work sometimes. You might be looking at 18 to 20 dB of loss being cross-polarized like that. But people check into our net all the time with vertical antennas. They're not very far away. They might only be in downtown Rochester, but they still try it and it works. So what kind of radios do we have up here? So I've got an FT, it's probably the new one, right? The FT 818, little tiny thing, 5-6 watts out, maybe 8 watts if you're pushing it. That's tough to make contacts on there, but there's these also insane people, QRP people, who get a kick out of making contacts with the least amount of power and the most amount of distance. So that works as well on VHF and UHF. That's the 857 here. That's the example I showed you. The 991 from Yaesu and the Kenwood TS2000. All of those have VHF, UHF, all-mode operation. Now, why would they put antennas horizontally? If everything else is vertical, why the heck are we doing this? What's the advantage? Yeah, so we got all these things for HF, they're all horizontal, right? That'd be kind of goofy if we tried to take one of those big HF things and put it up straight. But a lot of it has to do with the way the man-made noise is. And so, although vertical is very convenient for a mobile operation, a lot of our man-made noise you're more susceptible in vertical polarization. That's one of the reasons, and then the rest of it is just plain old convention. CW, excellent for DX. Not normally used for local communications unless you're learning as part of your CW group. But I'll tell you that it is probably better to hop on the air to do CW than it is to try to key your microphone on FM and try to use a code practice oscillator. If that's all you've got, do it. But why not go on 6-meter sideband or 6-meter CW and practice? On HF bands, there tends to be this separation between CW section of the band and the sideband section of the band, not by law, but by convention. And people get all antsy about it when you operate CW in the wrong portion of the band, right? If you've listened long enough, you'll hear people, why are you doing that? Why are you making the noise up here? Go down to the CW portion. You won't find that in VHF and UHF. You'll find people in the middle of a sideband contact. They can't complete it, so they'll switch over to CW right there on the spot. There's people who, I don't have a lot of power, so they'll be talking to me on sideband, and I'll be responding back to them on CW to finish the contact. So we don't get all excited about that on VHF and UHF bands. Operate anywhere in the band you want on CW, and we're pretty much happy with that. Typical speed is 13 to 18 words per minute. This is not the HF drag-out contesting 30 word per minute crowd. If we can send that fast, we can probably talk to each other on sideband. For those of you who are just learning CW, getting on the air during a VHF contest, at 13 words per minute, you'll be able to copy pretty much everybody that's out there. But I mentioned before, we do have to slow down quite a bit for those long distance contacts. And I could be sending away at 18 words per minute. A lot of times operators will send dashes. We asked about how do you aim the antennas and figure out where you're going. So an operator will just send dashes. They'll just hold the side of the key or flip a switch and they'll send dashes the whole time. So I'm tuning my antennas to try to find where they are, and I'll find them and I hear the dashes. And I send some dashes back and then he replies back to me and I can't copy any of the code. So I can hear the dashes, I understand what's going on, but by the time he starts sending the bits along with the dashes, I'm lost. So then I start sending back really slow. I'll start sending back at like the 4 to 5 word per minute range so that the guy gets a clue, right? He gets the clue, he has to slow down as well. Then we're able to complete the contact and say 5 or 6 words per minute. I'm not a very good CW operator, so you won't hear me rag chewing on CW. I'll listen to the guys on HF do that in the basement. I'll use it to get the QSO, the contact. Maybe we'll have to send a frequency where we're going to QSY up the band. I can tolerate that much and then move it on. All right, modern digital. I talked about this a little bit. As a mobile operator, I haven't used this a whole lot. Up to this point, as of January, up to January, mobile operators who have to put, say, a stroke R at the end of their call sign or a stroke P, the system was not very good with that, and so as a result, many of us didn't do it. That's now been revised, the issue is resolved, and all of us rovers, as we call ourselves, the stroke Rs, we can now use this digital mode and that it will understand what it is that we're sending. So I'll probably be adding digital modes in my car for the June VHF contest and practice a little bit of that in the spring. A couple modes you'll see very popular on VHF and UHF modes. One is MSK 144, and this is for bouncing off of meteor trails. You think, wow, where's the meteor trails there? They're there all the time. Ionized meteor trails are there. You can bounce signals off of them, and the software will decode just little bits, just little bits, and it will piece together all the digital information after all of those scatters to finally get you an entire set of information. That can take 2 minutes. Personally, I don't know if I have time to take 2 minutes for a contact, but it can operate some amazing distances. 1,000 miles on 2 meters. Imagine that. 1,000 miles using digital modes. No repeaters, no internet, pointing at the sky and letting it rip. FT8, that is common for sporadic E and troposcatter. Believe it or not, although most people are now using it on HF as well, it was designed for that purpose. And so you can increase your distance by up to 50%. So if my typical distance is 100 miles through CW, I can get up to 150 miles by converting over to digital. It's quite an amazing mode. I cannot hear some of the signals that the computer's decoded. So it is sub-audible decoding of signals. Amazing technology. Okay, all of these frequencies, as I mentioned, you can't just go to HRO and say, give me a 10 gigahertz radio, please. So this is the fun of it. And this is where you go to some specialty outfitters. This one happens to be a 222 megahertz transverter from Down East Microwave out of Florida. At the time, I think they were in New Jersey, but they're now down in Florida. And so this is what contains the local oscillator that mixes the frequency with, in this case, a 28 megahertz or a 10 meter radio. So I take a 10 meter radio like this, hook it up to this, and I get 222 megahertz out. If you're going to be serious about operating on these bands, especially the microwave bands, that's the only way to do it. We no longer have manufacturers out there that make these radios for these exotic bands. This happens to be a transverter from Elecraft. You're familiar with the K3 line and such. So if you go to their website, you'll see a whole series of VHF and UHF transverters. I bought and built one of these, had a great time doing it. I'm used to like the old school Ramsey kits where I told you step by step how to do it. That's kind of what Elecraft has. If you have never built one of these kits, it reminded me of a Ramsey kit that I built as a teenager. So what do you do with these? Your antenna for 222 megahertz gets hooked up straight to the transmitter. This is the back of my FT817. I hook the RF side up to the input. So 28 megahertz comes out of here, goes into the transverter. and I gotta tell the transverter to key. So for those of you with maybe big HF amps, you have to have a key line for your HF amp. Same thing with these. So I come out of the key line with a cable like this, and I plug it into the transverter, and up and running. Very simple. And that's kind of what the product looks like, and now I'm on 222 megahertz. And you can do this for any of the VHF, UHF, or microwave bands. You get the transverter with the right local oscillator, the mixer in it, and away you go.
Just curious, do
Yes.
you use like a frequency counter to find out what frequency you're actually on, or is the transverter actually set to a specific frequency and you just need to tune to, on the 817 or whatever, to a certain frequency?
Yeah, so the LO, it's very important that you have the frequency of the LO. Because that's what the mixing has to occur to get to your desired output. So it's really just the difference in frequency between the output, say 222 megahertz and 28 megahertz, gives you your LO. If your LO is off, it's really annoying because you can't find each other. So I'll tune to say 28.1 megahertz on my FT817, and that's supposed to mean 222.1 megahertz. Well, if my LO is drifting or it's off, it takes forever. So when you first get them, you kind of do a checkout and make sure everything's on frequency, and then from time to time, if I was to drop it or something, heaven forbid, but get it checked out. We got guys in the club with good meters to do that. But they'll publish the LO. If you build it yourself, well, you've got to have all the gear to do that, and you probably know what you're doing.
On some of the videos, you'll see a reference. What is that used for?
Yeah, so up on the microwave bands, you might use frequency multiplication to get to the higher frequencies. A lot of the old radios would use multiplication instead of mixing. And so what if you had 144 megahertz plus a local oscillator that was, say, 1152 megahertz, and then it multiplies it up from there. If that 1152 is off by
Just a tiny
500 hertz, by the time you multiply it up, you're not even going to be close to
So by using the same reference, it gives you.
So most of us use a 10 megahertz reference source. And so the 10 megahertz has a clock that'll align 1152 to be perfectly on 1152. We use rubidium as an element to get an oscillator, or we use GPS signals. So you put a GPS antenna outside your vehicle or your house, you have an oscillator in there, and then the GPS satellite will keep your time sync extremely close, and then you stay on frequency.
Okay.
You don't need that for anything, say, below 1.2 gigahertz. Once you get above that, well, it could be a while to find a guy if you're off just a couple hertz on your LO. All right, how do you find activity? FM activity, you find people on repeaters. Every once in a while, you find somebody on 5.2 simplex. Not too bad. Sometimes you may go around a few different repeaters and it'll be dead. We get that. 6 meter activity, you find that on 50.125 sideband. That tends to be the home frequency. So if you hear activity there, then you can kind of spread out and see how far it goes. If 50.125 is dead, then the band is probably dead. We talked about FT8, 50.313 for the digital modes. 2 meter activity, you'll find that between 144.200 and 144.260 in general. As I mentioned, we do have weekly nets where if you want to get on and just try it out, or you just want to listen, see if you can hear anybody. 144.260 sideband, upper sideband, and again 6 meters, which most of you will have in your HF rigs, 50.200, and we meet at 9 p.m. Anyone can participate, you don't need to be a member of the club. You don't even need to chat, you just want to do a radio check and see how everything's working. We try that.
9 PM one day?
On Mondays for 2 meters, and on Thursdays for 6 meters. Okay, so what about the other bands? You don't call CQ on the other bands. You don't even find activity on the other bands. Generally what happens is that you want to experiment on the upper bands. You want to say you're into building antennas and you want to test things out. All of your activity is going to be found in 6 meters and 2 meters, and then you're going to bring people up from there. So you'll meet them on 6 meters or 2 meters and say, okay, let's go try out 1.2 gigahertz today. And so you'll go QSY up and you'll try out 1296. Contests are a whole different beast. You will find people all over the place, but again, we still kind of meet on 6 meters and 2 meters and then say, hey, do you have any other bands? You want QSY up? And so that's how you get into those bands. A lot of experimenters. If you like to build gear, you like to build antennas, you like to try things out, you got lots and lots of frequencies without a soul to be found on them, you're not going to bother anybody there. Well, let's see, this is DX maps. Anybody familiar with that? DX maps? They help with some kind of spotting, if you will. So you'll find on dxmaps.com, you'll find real-time information about what people are posting. So in this particular case, we have a gentleman on 50.313, and he communicated 1,194 kilometers using some sporadic E. So it's kind of a spotting system. So if I'm at work, I'll tell my boss, but I'm at work before I leave, I might check DX maps to figure out if I want to go home early and get on 6 meters. 6 meters is dead, I'll hang out for a little while longer. Local beacons at the Antique Wireless Association, the Rochester VHF, they host the beacons for the Rochester VHF group. We appreciate that they do that. We have a few on there, and beacons are really important because it's a standard. So it's there every day, all the time. So if you want to compare different antennas or you want to try out different systems, then you can kind of get your own reference for how everything's working. So these beacons are on the most common frequencies available, and plus or minus 10 hertz or so, but you'll find them on these frequencies, and they serve as a great reference. And every time I change something in my system, I go back to the beacon and see how did it work. Now, not everybody's going to hear the 1.2 gigahertz beacon if you happen to have that band, but you should be able to hear about 2 or 3 of them from all around the greater Rochester area. And in my house in Webster, I can hear the 432 as well. It is weak. You really got to tune, you really got to listen for it. It's maybe 1 or 2 watts out of, what is that, East Bloomfield or something like that. So, or West Bloomfield, one of those areas. These are very low power devices, low gain antennas. So if you can hear them, if you were transmitting, we would hear you. Lastly, ON4KST chat. This is a chat room that was developed by this particular individual that has kind of overcome the VHF, UHF world. I think this is a screenshot I grabbed before I came. And this is where folks will get on and we'll try to set up some experiments. So if I want to experiment with somebody on 432 megahertz and say, hey, let's try it out today. Maybe the propagation is going to be favorable. We'll see if it works. You might be in Vermont, so I'll try to 70 centimeter contact with somebody in Vermont and set that up. So I'll get online and kind of set up that contact and see if we can make it work. Okay, so you've been warned about the disease. Maybe you're not completely thinking you're going to get hooked, but the images you are about to see could disturb you. I'm going to warn you right now. And these are from some folks who are at the advanced stages. I don't think we can heal them at this point. They're too far gone, but we'll see. Okay, so this is a friend of mine, John, in Macedon.
John Stevens.
Yep, WB2BYP. He
The big dish.
he has a very big dish
That is a
in
great,
his backyard. I think it's about the size of his house there. The scale looks right.
Tim, that is exactly what's on the screen. Picture of his dish.
Yep.
And he uses this to bounce signals off the moon. So if operating from here to California on 2 meters isn't enough, he wants to operate over to Europe on 2.3 gigahertz. And so from time to time, he climbs up here and replaces the head unit, the focal point for his dish, and he gets on some new arbitrary band and talks to Europe on UHF by bouncing signals off the moon using CW. He invited me to his house one day for an EME contest, and here we are bouncing signals off the moon on CW, and there's a delay, quite a delay by the time it hits the moon gets back. So I was able to do that a little bit. But this is not a really big station. There's really big stations over in Europe that can bounce their voice. Hello, moon. Hello, moon.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And you hear that, it's like, whoa, if this isn't a big station, I don't even know what that station looks like. So yes, this is a real person.
what kind of permit they from the local town did he have to go to?
I have no idea.
That's why he's an accident.
Just tell them you're trying to get HBO.
In the city, you'd have to buy 4 lots to do that.
Notice he doesn't have neighbors.
He does have neighbors, there is a cemetery right next door.
Oh, those kind of neighbors.
They never complain. This is,
Never complained.
I saw, you saw the map earlier, this is K1RZ, Dave, down in Maryland. So this is kind of his tower setup, so when I said this is one of the people I can talk to hundreds of miles on any given day, this is his setup, so he's set up all the way to 10 gigahertz at his house. That's not happening in Webster, so I'm still gonna have to put it on my car in order to make that work.
You would like for the CIA?
This is John Cam4 KMU FM Extreme Portable. This is a guy that wants to operate FMDX. You can see he's got chains on the tires. He will go anywhere to make this work. Yes,
Is he a member of the Vienna Wireless Society?
I think he is.
I had a temp job in Virginia, I met him.
Yeah. I think when I saw his club, the club that he submitted for, that's what the club he submitted for. He gets really into this. He builds contraptions to put this thing up in the air, and he is gonna get on the air, hell or high water, and he's gonna be there. Anybody who's got chains on their cars to get up there for contest is all over it.
For the VHF contest that we just had, I still get emails from the Vienna Wireless, and I think he drove up to Shenandoah National Park, which is probably 100 miles from Vienna, Virginia.
Unfortunately, he got iced out this year.
Oh, he
So we got, all the antennas got iced up, high SWR.
Oh, dear.
He had to pack it up and go home.
That's a shame.
All right, K1 CEO out of Connecticut. Again, Jeff, I can talk to him any day, maybe up to 1.2 gigahertz. I can talk to Jeff, 2.3 gigahertz on a good day, out of, say, Gannett Hill. I'll go set up there, and if you remember Gannett Hill, you can just live east forever. You'd think maybe you can throw a stone at Jeff the way he bombs in there on sideband, but real good station. He had a mini tornado come through and take out one tower that fell onto the other tower.
Oh, no.
So he rebuilt, got everything ready to go, and then this January contest got iced out. ISWR on all bands, shut the system down, and watch football, I think.
Not gonna power through the antennas.
With the amount of money you've got to spend on some of those amplifiers, I don't blame them. So any additional questions for me?
Yeah, I was wondering about in contrasting if you have two bands, like somebody's on CW and somebody's on sideband. Does that count or?
Absolutely. The ARRL does not penalize anybody for cross mode. The only time the mode really counts is if you're an FM-only contester. So if you claimed you're FM only contester and I claimed that I contacted you by CW, they're gonna say, they're gonna kick that out, and no points for either one of us.
So you can't like swap modes and then change your modes?
If you swap modes, then you're in the normal single out category. So there's been some folks who have gone to sideband on 6 meters and said, hey, can you switch over to FM? And without making the contact on sideband. But I don't know, if you have the capability to do sideband, why not do sideband? It's kind of more fun. What other questions? Yes, sir.
So, I've always been interested in EME, but it's a big effort. I mean, obviously, kind of like WB2, USP there, pretty insane. What's the minimum most people can do? What's the easiest band to do it on?
Sure, so 2 meters and 432, 2 meters and 70 centimeters are very, very common on EME. And now with FT, not FT8, but JT65, WSJTX suite, you can set up 100 watts and say a 12-foot Yagi on 70 centimeters, and you can make a contact on EME. That software, like I said, below the audible threshold, it might take you 5 minutes, it might take you half an hour, but you will make a contact on the 70 centimeter EME with the digital modes. If you want to do CW, you're going to have to put a bay of antennas up. You'll probably have to put a bay of between 4 and 8 of those Yagis up, and probably operate 500 watts to a kilowatt to be able to operate CW optimally. But 2 meters and 70 centimeters are very common. 1296, a little less so.
When Mike McHugh, W2AV, was active here in the area back in the 80s, he had 4 13-element boomers and a single 8877. And he was able to work successfully EME on 2 meters.
And again, that's the advanced stages of this illness. We support those who have advanced that far, and we gawk at them in awe as they make these contacts. So, just in closing, this was my September contest photo that did get published online for ARRL. This was me setting up, don't tell anybody, at Casa Larga Vineyards, and pointing to Toronto to make contact. So one of the advantages I have going out over with the system is I get to see some beautiful areas, I get to see some new things, and get accused of tracking bears and criminals.
Yeah, in Carcelaga, who was wondering, who is this guy that keeps coming here around sunset? Because I was talking to the manager.
Yeah, the owners have stopped down a few times just to make sure everything's going well. Often out there's like a wedding or something going on, and I'm just, I better not interfere with their PA system. Just as they're doing their I do's, they hear CQ, CQ. Sir.
So you have a antenna rotor in your vehicle?
Yep, right on top of the vehicle.
How do you power it?
I have 2 deep cycle batteries. They're actually 2 6-volt golf cart batteries, 200 amp hours,
Yeah.
and they have a connection to my alternator, which provides some charging. Not all, but some. From there, I have an inverter, about an 800 watt inverter that sits there, so I can generate AC power. The rotator doesn't
So
take
you're
much.
using an inverter, you just plug it into an inverter, and
Yep.
it's like it's in the house.
Yep, I got power of the laptop and the rotator, and it's really cold, maybe electric heating blanket or something from there. Yes.
You ground out that
You don't.
antenna system like during an electrical storm.
Yeah, you do not. You cannot effectively ground it except to the chassis of the vehicle, which provides some protection.
So you're
but not a
sitting
whole
duck
lot.
up there.
Not necessarily. When you do ground it to the chassis of the vehicle, you get roughly equivalent protection as you would just sitting in your car. But yeah, the radios don't have a whole lot of protection, just as you would in any lightning storm for your house. If you're home, you have a really good grounding system. I don't tend to go out raising antennas up in the air in a lightning storm, so. So if it happens, I lower the 6 meter, 2 meter. If it doesn't pass, I go home. Any additional questions? Yes.
Yeah, with that vehicle and all the visible antennas on it, you ever get concerned about leaving your vehicle even for a short time and having it, theft or vandalism and things like that?
Oh, usually when I put the system together, it's for some type of event. So I'm usually in it, or it's parked in my driveway. I do get a lot of people that kind of go really slow by my house, and they kind of look over and like, what the heck are you doing? But other than that, I don't have a concern. I don't park at Wegmans as an example, and go in and grab my tea.
How long does it take to get dressed up for one of these events?
4 hours to get dressed up, and an hour and a half to take it down. Any other questions? Yes.
You mentioned all mode, but you never mentioned AM.
I have made a few contacts on 6 meter AM, just because when I was a teenager, that was all I had was 6 meter AM. And for the nostalgia of it, there's a group that does get on 6 meter AM. But again, it's just kind of for the old time nature of it, and there's a very small group that likes to do that. Believe it or not, all of these radios do it. Most of these will turn over to AM just fine. The modern radios, though, you really got to embed yourself in the menus to figure out how to turn it on. When I was a teenager, I had FT101EE, and it was quite obvious how to use AM. On this thing, to figure out how to go to AM, well, you got to press that button and go into that menu and flip that switch, and maybe you'll figure out how to get on AM one of these days. All right, well, thank you very much. I appreciate you having me, and that's great.